So, a very good morning to all our viewers today. Today, we have with us a very prominent entrepreneur who has helped 230 purpose led businesses to create impact. He works with governments, tertiary institutions, and partners globally. He's a founder of Impact Bloom, which works with 200 countries and communities in them around the world. He sits on a number of boards, and his work has been recognized with two Australian Good Design Awards. He has led successful Australian bid for the Social Enterprise World Forum held in 2022 and a project that catalyzed the entire sector's growth nationally. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom, today. Thank you.
Harsha, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to all of you who are dialing in or listening today. It's great to be talking.
So, Tom, you graduated in industrial design and you led to founding Impact Boom and bolstering all the change makers globally. So, how has your journey been?
Well, it's a great question, Harsha. You're absolutely right, though. I didn't, in fact, study industrial design, and I graduated roughly a little bit less than 20 years ago. So it feels like time has flown. But it has been a journey, right? To ultimately go from finishing studying all the way through till, I suppose leading an organization today has been one of lots of trial and error and understanding ultimately what feels right for me and what has felt right for me and what has been less interesting or ultimately, though, that has really come out through experience, through practice, and through quite an entrepreneurial sort of journey. But for me, Harsh, it really started over in Barcelona. And when I graduated from industrial design here in Brisbane, Australia, I had already fallen in love with Spain and Barcelona in Europe. And so I decided back then that for me to further my own studies, I'd like to move over to Barcelona. And I had a few key objectives in mind. And that was really ultimately to do a master's, to learn Spanish and Catalan, which were the two languages from that area. And also to spend about 5 or so years working within the European market, gaining that experience to then return to Australia and set up something here and bring that experience with me. But instead of staying for 5 years, I stayed for 10 years. So I stayed 10 years living in Barcelona, and I did just that. I did a master's in product design, and it was there that I started working with a bunch of different organizations and started getting lots of experience in the space. And ultimately, here we are today with Impact Boom. But it's like I said, it's been a ride, and it's only come from experience.
That's an excellent journey and very inspirational too. So, product sustainability is becoming a concern, and since you hold the background in the same, what insights would you like to share to consider while designing a sustainable product?
I don't know where to start, to be completely honest. I mean, there's so many different ways and things that need to be considered when you are truly integrating sustainability in your work. And I'm saying this not from a tack-on sort of Band-Aid approach, but from an approach which is truly considering the system in which your design is being designed, right? In the environment, the context, all of those things. So, I mean, traditionally what we have seen is that sustainability has been quite tacked on. It hasn't really been systemic. It hasn't really been true. And to be honest, this is what I saw in my first job. I was working for Hewlett Packard, or HP, the IT sort of computer company, and I was designing the large format printers that are used in design studios and architect studios. You've probably seen them before. And what I discovered, though, was for myself as a designer, I had specific morals and ethics which didn't quite feel right when I was designing in that sort of corporate environment producing the type of products that I was producing. I do want to say, though, that the people I was working with were absolutely wonderful people, highly intelligent, great experience in taking products and taking them to market. And so all respect to them. But what I felt was missing was ultimately a deep responsibility for the long-term outcomes of the sort of work that we were producing. And so when it comes to sustainability, I think the first thing to recognize is that, this is not a simple, quick area that you can fix just by, for example, going from a plastic to a cardboard packaging design. It is much, much deeper, and it actually comes back to us designing and changing the systems in which the world operates. Like many designers and many of the students that I've worked with over the years as well, I think can sometimes take quite a light approach whereby they don't really understand and design for the full, all the different stages of the product life cycle. So, that's looking at, all the way back to all ultimately, the resources and where they're coming from, the processes that they are going through, where this is happening, the shipping that's required before, they even get to any sort of manufacture or assembly, how the product is assembled and put together, which also means that we are considering how they are disassembled and taken apart and perhaps upcycled and put into more circular systems. And all of this happens before the product even gets into the hands of the consumer, right? So these are all parts that can very much be designed for to design a more sustainable product. And of course, there's the actual use phase, but lots of the embedded carbon in a product is actually generated, before it even reaches a user's hands, and also afterwards, right? So we need to consider the shipping, the packaging, how many of these units can we fit inside a container, for example. So are we shipping air, which is just more carbon, right? And also, like I said as well, what are we doing when it comes to the actual product to help extend the life of the product? What are we doing to consider how that's going to be used or handed down generations? Not just in the physical design, but in the emotional design, the connection that's being created between a product and a user, and therefore, a desire to continue to use that product over time or hand it down over generations, all the way through, like I said before, to disposal or disassembly, hopefully not disposal anymore, hopefully integration back into some other sort of system whereby we are no longer, taking, using and wasting in that linear model, but as I'm sure you've been talking about, looking at more circular, truly circular systems to ensure that what we're designing is actually, taking care of the world, taking care of the people in it, and actually designing in a way that considers our future generations.
So that's very interesting to learn from you. Now, for say, if we have a perfectly sustainable product, like we have Ayurvedic products, we have herbal products, we have organic products, but the packaging is still a loophole. So how do you coming from that particular background and you also supporting all the entrepreneurs, what would be your thought process? What kind of ventures should come up, or how can we correct this?
It's a great question again, and I think again it's only answered when we look at the systemic nature that we're designing in, and the people we are designing with and alongside. And I say that instead of designing for, right? I think good design is actually done with and alongside the people that you are designing a solution for, right? They should be a crucial part of that design process. But saying that, again, packaging, to be honest, yes, there are absolutely more sustainable ways to be packaging like an Ayurvedic product, for example, or an oil. But again, I think we need to consider those other parts of the product life cycle, because if we're not considering where we are procuring from, the sort of labor processes, where it's being manufactured, all of that other stuff, then, packaging is just one very simple element of a much, much deeper life cycle. Of course, the packaging ideally is not going to be made from a material that's not going to be able to be broken down, for 20,000 years. Hopefully it's something which is, coming from a material source that can be renewed or regenerate the earth and whatever else for thousands of years. But I think, again, it's a deeper question, because if we're looking at, for example, Ayurvedic oils or ingredients or something like this, and we're talking about packaging, perhaps we might be looking at different ways of distribution, different ways of consuming that actually reduce packaging in the first place, right? Perhaps we're looking at a new way of wholesaling or retailing these products in the first place, so that people might take reusable containers to a shop and buy from bulk and refill containers, with some special packaging. Perhaps they are distributed in a way, to different sort of central parts around India or globally, whereby people can go and pick them up. And so there is a lot less sort of miles, happening. So again, I want to sort of flip it back and say it actually fits in a broader context. And for us purely to look at packaging is not to actually understand how to design sustainably, in my opinion.
Well, I guess this is a question that the entire industry needs to rethink upon, and it's a larger challenge in front of all of us. Now, back to Impact Boom. Now, Impact Boom is supporting impact entrepreneurs. So, which facets are you all involved in to support them?
Yeah, well, Impact Boom exists to help grow the business for good movement globally. And by that, I mean doing business that is tackling social, cultural, and environmental problems. So business that exists to tackle deep-rooted problems, right? So those are the people we work with. How do we support them? And how do we change this systemically, globally? Well, there's a few ways. One is education and capacity building. So what I mean by that is we offer programs to entrepreneurs globally, impact-led or purpose-led entrepreneurs who have, products or services that are really intended to tackle, deep-rooted problems. So we guide them through specific programs called, typically accelerator or incubator programs that run for a specific duration. And this gives them, workshops, time with specific experts covering all these different areas. It gives them access to online learning modules, to one-on-one mentoring, and to events and exposure. So that's one area. It's sort of like walking alongside these different founders to ensure that they're getting the deep support that they need, because it's a very difficult journey to take, an idea out of your head to turn it into that tangible thing, which is actually solving a real world need and doing so in a way that creates impact. So that's something that we offer. But we also offer media. So we have a blog and a podcast at impactboom.org. And we have there almost 400 different podcasts now with different impact-led, purposeful leaders from around the globe who are sharing their journeys in design and social innovation, social enterprise, in order to ultimately uncover the insights and the experience that they've gone through. Because we believe that way, again, the education is flowing, but there is therefore a deeper awareness about the possibility to use design and business for a greater means than just an economic return, right? And that's been one of our big problems, has been a focus in business on purely generating economic and financial returns. But we do know that we can do that and do it with a deeper purpose at the same time. We can do that and actually wake up feeling good and feeling passionate because we are using business as a driving force to generate, positive change. So that's a couple of ways that we work. I mean, that leads into work with governments and policy design. But ultimately, the core part of what we're doing is providing that education, that mentoring, that support to help people create some impactful products and services.
Being an entrepreneur, I totally agree with what you're saying. Education in this field of being an entrepreneur and being an impact entrepreneur is quintessential, because we are not taught this in the schools and colleges. So it's a journey along the way for us. How would you define the difference between impact entrepreneur and mainstream entrepreneur? Because both of them are working as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so look, impact entrepreneur versus mainstream entrepreneur, I think the only real difference is both are looking to create some sort of project, ideally that's going to generate change of some sort. An impact-led entrepreneur starts with their why. They start with a deep purpose and a deep understanding of the problem that they are trying to solve, right? And that comes from using, good design methodologies and a good understanding that, it's important to get good primary and secondary research. It's important to define a problem. And it's important to do all that sort of design work so that that whatever you're designing is responding to very specific needs. But an impact-led entrepreneur is driven, like I said, from that why, from that deeper purpose that is aligned with the greater good. And that is the reason that they exist as a company or as a social enterprise or a profit for purpose, whatever they want to call that. They exist as a business to create that change, right? But they believe that a business and a self-sustaining business that generates revenue is able to create that change, right? Whereas, let's say a unicorn mindset entrepreneur. So when I talk about unicorns, this is a definition that's used in the startup space typically, right? Whereby you take a company from a $0 to a billion dollar valuation, as soon as you can. And for many entrepreneurs, that remains the primary focus, the economic return, the valuation. And in many cases, that sees them putting all of these other important things to the side, or without any consideration for the deeper impact that their work is actually having. So those are the fundamental principles. Like, I think whereby it's done without purpose and whereby it's done, pretty much in a selfish way of what return can I get for myself? How much financial return can I get as quickly as possible, whilst ignoring the deep consequences it can have, for so many people around the world and our future generations. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is looking at it responsibly, actually taking that responsibility on and owning it, but doing it in a way that, is also making money and therefore generating more impact at the same time.
That's excellent and very well explained, Tom. Um, Tom, along the journey, even you are an entrepreneur, and we would like to know the challenges that you faced while achieving or while doing what you do, and how did you face those challenges? Because it's an inspiration to learn from you.
Oh, look, again, I honestly don't know where to start, because I think that's one thing about being an entrepreneur, right? Is that the challenges come at a constant pace, almost daily. And I think that probably brings us back to a few important pieces of being an entrepreneur, right? I think understanding that it's not an easy journey is one thing, but what that means is, having a deep passion, having resilience, having persistence, and a flexible sort of mindset to understand that it's not going to be easy. You are going to come up against a lot of boundaries and a lot of barriers that are preventing you from having that success or that impact that you want to create. And so some of the founders that, we've certainly worked with, the more successful ones are typically those that display those qualities, right? They do have a sense of optimism, but that's based in realism as well. And they understand that it's important to get out there very, very early. It's important to start testing and prototyping and piloting their offerings with real world people. But it's also important to be measuring their impact, and it's important for them to be flexible as they respond to what works well and what doesn't work well. Ultimately, though, being an entrepreneur can be very, very lonely, right? And I think it's really important that, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And I think with an entrepreneur, you really do need to support yourself with like-minded or a community of people who can provide you with that support, so that when shit gets tough, and it will do, you have some support around you. You can stay focused, you can find a way to get around that, and you can push forward. So that's ultimately it. I think having that mindset, whilst being flexible and responsive, so you can understand when something isn't working, and you're not trying to flog a dead horse and just keep going at something which ultimately isn't going to provide, good value for an intended, set of people. But understanding, what feedback you're getting and how you can continually evolve as you look towards creating that value.
So, Tom, as an entrepreneur, what is your vision for Impact Boom in the coming 5 years?
That's a great question, Harsha. It really is. Look, we would ultimately love to see social enterprise or impact-led business, right? We would like to see this term become redundant. I would like to see this just simply being called business, right? Returning to, I think, where we started when we look at our First Nations and Indigenous populations that traded for thousands and thousands of years before us here in Australia, but they did so in a way that, was regenerative for the environment, that took deep care of culture and place, people. And it was just the way that it was done. I think once we became more and more focused on GDP, and other measures of success, I think that's led us down a route that's seen us ultimately, in many ways, pillaging the earth and doing it in a very selfish way that doesn't consider the broader impacts. So for us, look, I think it's pretty ambitious, but ideally in 5 years, this would be the way that people do business, right? And that's I suppose the larger vision is, a world where, business is just done in a way that actually is regenerative, that actually cares for people and planet, and steps up and takes some responsibility around that.
That's such a great message and so profound. It's really great to hear that. Now, any final message to our viewers and topics that we should cover as a training institute in responsible business leadership?
Where to start? I'll start on the. I'll say this. Sometimes we focus a lot on our business. Sometimes we focus a lot. We get really, really passionate about what it is we're doing, particularly when you're doing it with a deeper purpose, particularly when you're trying to create some really positive change. And like I've mentioned, that journey can be really tough. It can be difficult. It can be tiring, and it can lead to burnout. And so I suppose just bringing the message back to the particular founders, if you're considering and doing this, or if you're already doing this, I think it's really important that you continue to take care of yourself. And that doesn't mean, working 80-hour weeks to the detriment of the relationship with your family and your friends. It does require you to continue to invest in yourself as a person, to continue to take breaks, to be responsible as a family member or a friend, and to I suppose own those particular roles that you may play as a parent or a student or a son or a daughter or whatever else, and have some fun as well. Go and enjoy your life a little bit, because when you are recharged, when you sleep well, when you look after yourself, you have that energy and that ongoing sort of desire and drive to create excellent things.
Thank you so much, Tom. We have one of the viewers who have raised a question. What is your take on new trend on ESG program and practices?
Yeah, great question. Thank you very much for asking. So ESG is ultimately, to me, how I see it is almost just, the new trend that has just evolved over time, particularly when it comes to the corporate space, right? So this, I would argue, started out more so as CSR, okay? The CSR movement then moved to one that was called shared value. And the shared value stuff was sort of floating around for a while. And now we've moved more or less to ESG, right? Now, hopefully on each of those steps, what we are seeing is a deeper understanding that, we cannot just be tapping on, like, for example, if we are a large corporate, let's say, mining company, okay, who is, let's say, mining coal from the earth, a very dirty form of powering, also necessary when it looks at the populations of the earth, but a very dirty form of power production. If we are a company like this who is generating, let's say, $10 billion a year in revenue, and at the same time, however, part of our ESG practice is investing a fraction of that into some local sustainable projects, whilst ignoring the deeper impacts that we're having over here that is generating the profits to reinvest in that way, then unless it's holistic, it's basically just another marketing activity to try and clean the image of bad practice, right? So I think ESG programs and practices can be great. They can be great when they are done in an authentic way that considers the deep problem, which actually considers all the negative externalities, all the negative consequences that a particular organization is creating, and seeks authentically to correct this and to change the system. If it's just done as a side to try and look good, then, to be honest, it's probably just a marketing activity which isn't done with the right purpose. So I think it's understanding the deeper impacts of the organization and whether or not that is being considered.
Thank you, Mr. Karthik, for the question. And thank you, Tom, for having the patience and to answer all our questions and sharing your knowledge in a small snapshot. It has been wonderful having you with us today. And yes, it's an inspiration, and we do look forward to Impact Boom to Bloom.
Thank you so much, Harsha, and thanks so much for inviting me today, for all of you who have tuned in today. I thoroughly appreciate it. And look, we have lots of free resources and interviews on impactboom.org. So I welcome you to jump on the podcast, to have a listen to all these other leaders, people that I'm sure Harsha is also interviewing and really passionately doing so. So good luck to all of you, and I wish you the best on your journey in creating impact via design and business.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.